Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Grant Writing and Storytelling, Turning Mission into Momentum. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit improving access and knowledge in entrepreneurship to advance economic progress for all. And so, as you will see in the chat in just a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to help entrepreneurs fuel prosperity no matter where their journey begins. So, definitely be sure to check out those links and resources shared in the chat. And we are going to launch a few polls just to step back and take a temperature gauge. See how everyone is doing here in the room with us today. And we use this information to guide the programs we provide for this global community of entrepreneurs. And so if there are any specific topics or challenges you would like us to create resources for, please feel free to share those in the chat. And just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. We always love to see where everyone is joining us for our time together today. And second, we're going to have some live Q&A at the end of the event, so please feel free to submit your questions at any time. There's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to get to as many as we can. And while you are answering these polls, I'd like to just take a moment to recognize the incredible support of our corporate partners. The work that we do at the center would not be possible without the generosity and belief of our partners and funders, including NASDAQ, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, KPMG, Walmart, the Asia Innovation Hub, Wilson Sonsini, the Nareit Foundation, and BPM. We are deeply grateful for their partnership, and we hope you'll join us in sharing that appreciation. Awesome. We got one more poll going here. Wonderful. Let's see. We got folks from Maryland, Illinois, California, New York, Alaska, North Carolina, New Jersey, Hawaii, Colorado, DC, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Oregon, Virginia, Ohio. Oh, this is awesome. And Ghana, welcome, welcome. Kansas, wonderful. Oh, so great to have folks all over the place joining us today. All right. And with that, I think we just finished our last poll. So without any further delay, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our special guest, Tiffany Stewart, CEO at BirthWrite Consulting Group. Tiffany, so excited to have you on with us for this incredibly important topic, which is always highly requested. And so I'm going to pass it right over to you.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. I saw the poll. I'm glad that most of us are optimistic. Hi, Christina. How are you? Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm going to share my presentation and we'll get started right now. Okay. All right, so grant writing and storytelling. We're going to talk about how to turn your mission into momentum. And as we're going through this workshop together, I want you to keep in mind and have at the forefront of your mind the very thing that you have in your heart that you want to do, right? I want that to be the thing that you're thinking about this entire workshop. What is it that you want to do? What is your mission? What is your vision? It doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit, a for-profit, an LLC, a corporation. It doesn't matter if you're looking for a scholarship, if you are even trying to create contracts, right, for paid work. That part doesn't matter. The story remains the same in terms of what you are trying to do and the transformation you are trying to bring to the world. So we're all in different spaces, I know, but the goal remains the same. I'm going to help you today master the art and strategy of grant writing that secures funding and advances your mission. Okay. So the first thing, there's only one rule in this room, and that is you have to believe, right? You have to believe your work is valuable. You have to believe that your work is fundable. You have to believe that what you are doing is important because there's no way for anyone else to believe it if you don't. So, can I just get a one in the chat if you believe? I'm hoping everybody believes, but that's the rule. You have to believe. And I'm looking, okay, I see the chat. So one in the chat if you believe, okay? All right, perfect. Now I'm going to tell you a story. I can't really tell you about storytelling, right? Without telling you about a real story. This story is mostly true. I took out some of the details just for people's privacies. But it's about a person I met who became a client whose name is Bill. Who had been getting rejected for funding, and then how we basically helped him get funding for his program. But before I tell you about the program, I want to tell you a little bit about Bill, the background, and all of that. Okay. So here we go. I met a man named Bill on the subway. He was the founder of a nonprofit and a full-time social worker who spent his days navigating the foster care system, often sitting in courtrooms advocating for students who had already been counted out. But when the clock struck 5, Bill didn't go home. 3 nights a week, he transformed a dusty community room in the basement of Mount Zion Church into a sacred space for healing. He called it Healing Beats Collective, a free program for teenage boys who had been through things no one their age should experience. Many had lost friends to gun violence, others had been expelled, labeled angry, or shuffled through systems that didn't see their brilliance. The boys didn't come for therapy. They came to make beats. At first, it was rough. Bill had one old laptop and barely any working equipment. But what he did was always show up. Bill had once been one of those boys. He knew what it was like to write your feelings down because you didn't trust the voice to speak them out loud. Each week, they talked about life, how to interview for a job, show up to school, handle stress, or deal with police encounters. But the magic happened when they made the music. One student wrote a song about grief and played it at a showcase. Another shared a spoken word piece about growing up without his father. By the end of each session, the energy in the room shifted. What started as rage and silence became release and resilience. But the truth was, burn Bill was burning out, right? How many of us can relate to that? He was using his own paycheck to buy studio time, pizza, and transit cards. He covered honorariums for guest speakers and begged friends to volunteer. Attendance started to dip when he couldn't offer rides or food. He started to ask himself the question that haunts many change makers today, probably some of you in this room. How can I keep doing this alone? So naturally, Bill did what most people do, right? He applied for a grant. He saw a grant for $75,000, and the eligibility requirements fit his organization perfectly. He answered every question, he submitted it on time, and the result was what? Denied, right? And we know it's not personal most of the time, but rejection still is a big deal, right? Knowing that you're doing all the work, knowing you're pouring your heart into something, knowing that you met the requirements, and then someone to still tell you no. All right. So now I'm going to read something that Bill shared with me. He says, when I was 14, I used to ride the subway for hours to avoid going home. Not because I didn't have a place to live, but home was where the shouting started the moment I walked through the door. Home was where I learned to be invisible so I wouldn't become the target. I'd ride that train in loops around the city until the conductor started recognizing me. I didn't have a destination, just headphones and a notebook. I scribbled lyrics, half thoughts, poems, rants, trying to make sense of everything that I was carrying. When things got really bad, I walked for miles sometimes. Eventually, someone lent me an old laptop. I spent nights teaching myself how to make beats. At first, I just layered drum sounds over old samples. Music gave me a place to belong, even if it was just in my headphones. Fast forward to now, I'm not riding trains to escape anymore. Today, I run Healing Beats Collective, a nonprofit where young boys, just like I once was, can come after school to do what I did: write, create, feel, and heal. We're not just making songs, we're making space, and that space is saving lives. So my question is to you, how do you connect what you do with your passion and the story in a grant application? And if any of you have ever seen a grant application, most of the time they want you to do this in 1,500 characters or less, right? Your executive summary is like where we start with a grant. How do we get to the heart and to the point? I'm glad you asked. Okay, so now we're going to go over two different examples, right? Because in grant writing, data makes it real, but the story makes it matter, right? The story makes it matter. So I'll read the first one, and then we'll go on to the second. Healing Beats Collective is requesting $75,000 to support youth programming. We have served over 200 youth through arts-based enrichment and mentoring. This funding would allow us to grow our impact, reach more communities, and cover operational needs like staffing and supplies. We believe in empowering youth through creativity and personal development. Sounds good, right? Wouldn't you say? Okay. The next one, Healing Beats Collective equips young men impacted by trauma with tools to heal and lead through music and storytelling. We request $75,000 to expand our trauma-informed workshops to 2 underserved sites, serving 150 youth with a proven curriculum that blends creative expression with life skills. Participants show improved school attendance, emotional regulation, and confidence. This investment helps us scale what's already working to reach those most in need. Which one sounds better? And you could just put it in the chat, right? There's one that resonates more strongly. And which one is that for you? And if you can say, right, say what about it, right? Because I have on the bottom what makes the difference between the two. The one on the first one, is generic, right? It lacks a little bit of the details. It doesn't demonstrate connection to the funder's mission, and there's no story. There's no story, right? But on the second one, you start to get a little bit of a story, right? You start to get a little bit of a bigger picture of what happens to these youth. You get some details that are aimed at the outcomes, not just the activities that will happen. And so this is the difference between a denied and an approved. And this is actually a real difference, right? The first funding application was denied, but the second application with more detail throughout the application, but with the executive summary was approved. And a part of the reason is because the funders are not going to connect the dots for you. We have to connect the dots for them in order, because it's our vision, right? And so when you want someone to see or invest or buy into your vision, you have to paint the picture, you have to tell the story. And this is how you begin to do it. So just keep in mind the differences. So right now, before we go into anything else, because we're gonna dive deep into the anatomy of a grant proposal. What amount of money would make your dream sustainable? Not what you think you can get, not the most you've already gotten, but what do you actually desire to win? And I want you just to take a minute to think. Don't rush, but I want you to not be afraid to say the number that you really want. Again, don't make this number the thing that you think you can, or the thing that the most you've already gotten. I want this number to be the number you actually desire, the number you need to do the work you want at the scale with no limits on it. And if you don't know that number now, I want you to think about that number in this week, because it's going to be important to your application. Is going to be important to your contract. It's going to be important to the work you want to do. You need to know what it costs, right, to do the work that you want to do at the level that you desire to do it. And I'll just give everyone just a minute or two to do that. Okay, perfect. I can't see a lot of the numbers, but I'm sure that they're there. So great. Okay. So let's break it down from the blueprint to getting funding. All right. So again, This is a very general template because there's a lot of different people in the room. But these are usually the elements in which you will have to address. Again, doesn't matter if you're trying to get a contract, it doesn't matter if you're responding to an RFP, it doesn't matter if you're trying to get grant money. These are the things that you need to know in order to carry out your mission that people need to know in order to invest. These are the things that you need to have clear answers to that make you a good investment. So we'll start and then we'll break down each one. Executive summary, right? This is your ask. It's your elevator pitch. It's basically the short version of what you do, how you do it, who you do it for, and your transformation, right? The next part is your problem statement. What's at stake? Why this matters now with compelling evidence. Right? This is a lot where the story comes in. Your goals and outcomes. What will change because of your program? Chrissy, what will change because of your program? I know it's something, right? What are the objectives with transformational impact? The next part is methodology. How will it happen? These require actions and a realistic plan of implementation. And then we have a part where a lot of people tend to run away from, and it's budget narrative, the budget, right? The budget, right? Because there's this myth that like a nonprofit, people, we don't want to deal with the budgets. We don't want to deal with the numbers. But guess what? The numbers matter. And guess what? The numbers and what you put your money toward tells a big part of your story, right? Without you even having to spell it out. It tells you what you care about. So what will it cost and why? And it also demonstrates your stewardship and your strategic vision, right? Because there has to be a plan after today. There has to be a plan after this grant. And that's what funders want to know. They want to make sure there's a plan after today. And then there's evaluation. How will you prove it? How do you know it works? Right? How do you know you're just not biased? And my program is great because I did it, right? How do you know? How will you measure? How will you prove your impact? And then lastly, there's sustainability. What happens after the grant ends? Your plan for continuing beyond the grant period, right? Grants are a great help, but I tell my nonprofits all the time, you want to diversify how your money comes in because, depending on climates and different things and the foundations, and there's so many different parameters for when someone gives a grant, right? So you want to have a plan for sustainability. So let's break down each part, right? And we'll continue to use Bill because he's a good example. Um, I'm sure that we all in the room could know someone who would love to be a part of this program, right? That helps young teen boys, right, heal and be creative. So we talked a little bit about the executive summary for Healing Beats Collective, but let's talk a little bit about a problem statement, right? What does a good problem statement sound like? Here's a little bit about, here's what it could sound like. Across urban communities, young men of color face high exposure to trauma, yet lack access to healing-centered spaces that affirm their identity and provide creative outlets. Traditional counseling models are often underutilized and distrusted. Without intervention, trauma manifests as school disengagement, aggression, or justice involvement. Healing Beats Collective addresses this urgent gap through culturally resonant programming that builds emotional tools through music. So how many would agree that was a good problem statement, right? What's at stake in this? What's at stake in this problem? Right? What's at stake? It's young men who are going to be exposed to what? Trauma, lack of access, into aggression, disengagement from school, justice involvement. There's a term going around now. I think a lot in the Northeast, they're in education, but could be everywhere. Disconnected youth, right? Disconnected youth who either don't have a job or don't have a job that pays well. They're not really, tapped in. They don't have a degree, right? This is what a lot of funders care about right now, right? And you never want to try to be everything that someone cares about, but it's important for you to know the climate so you can know how to speak to funders in order to get their attention. So That's an example of a problem statement. I want you to think about this for your own organization. What is at stake if your organization does not succeed, right? What's at stake if you don't get the funding? Who suffers? Answer that question. I'll give everyone like 10 seconds, but think about that question. You can put it in the chat, you can put it in your notes, but it's important for you to know. Another thing that a lot of people get tripped up over is goals and outcomes. And I'm actually going to pull up goals and outcomes on my next slide because I think that's an important one so we understand what that looks like. But for now, right, I'll just give you a few examples of what goals and outcomes sounds like. So one of Bill's goals was to expand trauma-informed music therapy to 150 youth across 2 locations. That's a goal, right? But what's the outcome of that, right? There's a difference. The outcome of that is 85% of participants report improved emotional self-expression, right? Another outcome of that is 70% demonstrate increased school attendance or reduced behavioral infractions. So that's an important outcome, right? Another goal, right? And I would still say to you, you should always have 2 to 3 goals at least, right? You want at least 2 to 3 goals. That's just something that you want to make sure you have when you're talking to anybody about your program or about your vision, about your organization. Let's move on to methodology for a second because we'll come back to goals and outcomes. Methodology is really about how. How will it happen? Right? Is it an after school program? Is it curriculum based? Is it a Zoom conference? Is it a workshop? Is it a site visit? Right? How does it happen? How does your magic happen? For Bill, it was a weekly after school workshops led by trained music producers and trauma informed facilitators, right? It was also the counseling aspect, the mentoring aspect of it. Bill also did check-ins and restorative practices that he did weekly with the students. And then at the end of a semester or a session, they would do community showcases, right, to celebrate the youth and to put the youth on display. So I want to know, what is your methodology? And that's something that you can think about. I'm also going to talk about the budget a little bit in the next slide because we'll go there. And then lastly, I want to talk about, well, not lastly, I want to talk about evaluation, right? How do you know your program is good? And you can feel free to put in the chat. How do you know your program? What do you do to evaluate your program, right? What's the checkpoint of yourself? Some people use pre and post surveys, right? Some people do attendance. Some people do a midpoint check-in. Some people use the grades from the school, right? But how do you know? How do you know that what you're doing is working? And how do you evaluate and troubleshoot and refine and perfect that what you do? And the last thing is sustainability. And this can be a hard one as well, right? Because as a nonprofit, especially, a lot of times people depend on grants. But there are ways, right, to diversify your revenue and not solely rely on grants. And so one of the things that Bill did was he decided to do district MOUs, right, with schools. Maybe they can't pay a lot, but they can pay a little. He also incorporated a volunteer teaching model into it. So he didn't have to pay, hire all staff and pay all staff. He incorporated volunteers who wanted to volunteer their time. And then he also did some like earned revenue, right? So the selling of the students' mixtapes and tracks and performance fees and things of that nature. And then another thing that a lot of nonprofits do is partner with corporations and foundations, right? So let's move on a bit. Okay, so let's look a little bit deeper into goals and outcomes and the budget. Because this is where most people get tripped up, right? People think, well, what is my goal, right? You know what your goal is, but then what's the outcome? Here's an example of how you can frame your goals and your outcomes, right? We already talked about the first goal of Bill's, but let's talk about the second one. Develop and showcase youth created music projects. That's a goal. And it's a good goal, right? It's one that is aligned to his organization, his nonprofit. It makes sense. And the outcome of that is host two public Beats That Heal showcases to build confidence and community pride. The second outcome of those showcases are create 25 original tracks reflecting youth voice archived online. Those are good goals. Those are good outcomes. The reason why this is so important, and this is probably where most people get tripped up, is because whoever invests in you wants to know the return on investment, right? Sometimes the return on investment is not actual money, but it is the outcome of your program. They want to know what your goal is because they want to know what they'll be able to say the outcome is, right? Or what you say the outcome is because they want to know how their money was used to impact. So it's great if you have an organization and you help people and you want to advance, systems and equity, all these things, right? But you need to have specific goals and specific outcomes because people want to know specifically how their money is building the impact, right? They want to know what happens with it. And then budget is probably the number one thing that people get tripped up over. And your budget tells a very important story about your organization, and it tells an important story about what you care about. And the reason why I say that is it's very easy for people to say, we're all about youth, but maybe their budget doesn't tell the same story. So you want to make sure that your budget reinforces the story that you are saying on paper, right? And so when we think about Bill, do you think, and this is the question you could put in the chat, do you think but his budget reinforces? Do you think it reinforces his story? Because $30,000 of his 75 is going to teaching artists, right? For the two sites. Yes, it definitely reinforces it, right? Sandra says yes, it reinforces it. If he were to say that 30,000 of his money, right, was going to admin, that doesn't make sense. Why? Right? One rule of thumb that I want you all to know is that for your budget in general, your admin cost should never be 10% of your ask, right? And in very specific cases, depending, it can be if you see Bill, it is 10% over. It is over 10%, but he includes evaluation there, and that's important. But if you have just admin for $20,000 and you're asking for 60, that's a red flag, right? It's a red flag. People will say, well, why does it cost that much? Right? So when you look at his budget, every line in his budget reflects the belief that healing is a creative, intentional, collective process, right? They invest in the people who teach it, they invest in the tools and the practices that transform. So you see the majority goes to his teaching artists. The next are the program manager who runs it, right? Then it's the actual equipment. And then you have the trauma training and clinical oversight, right? Because he's saying, yes, the music is important, but we need the clinical aspect of it also included in this because we know how important that is. And then he spends the rest on admin and showcases. That is a good budget, right? That is a budget that a funder or a foundation or anyone who's giving money could feel comfortable with and will be able to ask a question and you can give answers to that justify your budget. Even if they didn't agree with it, this is a justifiable budget. An example. Okay. So now we're going to do a little activity, and I want you all to participate in this because this will be important. This is a framework. We're going to begin because I can't have you come here and just listen, right? We're going to begin to frame stories. We're going to begin to tell your own story so that by the end of this workshop, you can really start to dive deep and really go after the funding that you want. But you have to have something. So there's four parts to this framework, right? There's many frameworks out there. This is one that I like and it works in this type of setting is who's impacted, the faces and the names behind your statistics. What's the barrier, the obstacle that is preventing transformation? What is your unique solution? What can only your organization provide? And what are the visible results, the tangible changes that funders can envision? I want you to answer those four questions, right? Don't worry about making it flow or putting it together or grammar or any of those things. But I want you to at least answer those four questions. And I'll give us like 2 or 3 minutes to do it. And while you're thinking about that, um, I'll read to you the data only version and the story led version, right? Of something like this, just so you get an idea, right? So data only version says, our organization serves 450 youth annually through after school programming. We request 75,000 to expand services to an additional location. Okay, right? That's great. 450 youth. That's wonderful. And you want to expand? Beautiful, right? But here's the story-led version. When Jamal discovered our music program, he hadn't spoken in class for 6 months. 6 weeks later, he performed an original song about resilience that moved the room to tears. With $75,000, we can create this transformation for 150 more youth, right? Big difference. Huge, huge difference. Night and day, right? It really gives when the story-led version almost makes me want to close my eyes, right? And I begin to envision a student who has not spoken in class, right? I begin to envision like how hard that must be for that person. And then for him, right, to perform something that was original and then for other people to be moved by it. Yeah, I definitely want to give $75,000 to create this transformation for more people. And that's the difference, right? That is the difference. So I want you to think about that because the thing with funders is they want to feel something. They care about the numbers. They care about how many people you're impacting. They care about the budget. They care about, all of the clinical stuff, the facts and the figures and the numbers, but they also want to feel the emotion, right, of what you do. And the only way for them to ever feel that is for us to tell them, right, and create that for them. So this is advice for a grant. This is advice for really anything in life, right? The best storytellers are great listeners. I'll say it again. The best storytellers are great listeners. They're even better listeners, right? And the reason why that is because in order to tell a good story to whoever you're telling it to, you have to first know who you're talking to. You have to listen to understand what's important to them, right? It's the same thing if I were to come on this Zoom and you're expecting to learn how to write a grant and what makes a good grant, but I'm not listening, right? I didn't listen to the poll. I didn't listen to what people are struggling with. I didn't listen to, any of what happened prior to. It's not going to be of value to you. You're not going to want to hear it, right? But when people listen, right, it makes a big difference. And we don't just have to ramble. It causes us not to have to ramble, but go right to the point of what they want to hear. There's a book it's not a grant writing book, but I have my blur on. It's called How to Tell a Story, and it's by the Moth Collection. And it's available on Amazon or anywhere, but it's a great book um that just talks about story, right? It's not grant specific, but what it really does is helps you understand not only how to tell a great story, but why it matters, right? I always tell people, and I'm sure people might have questions, but people always ask me, oh, can you use Chat GP for a grant, all this stuff. What I say to AI is you can use AI, but don't let Don't let AI use you, right? Because your voice in the story matters, right? It matters. And I understand that, you could kind of get ChatGPT to, clone to your voice and do all these things, but no, your voice in the story matters. I've had clients who want to go straight to it. No, your voice matters. What's purposed in your heart matters. It makes a big difference, right? Um, Also, when you're telling stories, it helps you build trust through vulnerability because you have to share parts of that are not pretty all the time. You have to say things that maybe you don't want to say, but it really helps to build that connection, right? And then the most powerful thing about stories is that they have these things in them that are universal truths, right? Doesn't matter where you live, it doesn't matter what time zone you're from, what continent you're from. There are certain things about stories that we all can feel. And that is the most powerful thing. So we're going to talk a little bit. We talked a lot about, our stories, what we want to say, but we have to talk about the listening part because this is so important because it doesn't matter how great my story is. If I'm not listening, well, it's not that great, right? So when you go into a grant application, there's a lot of information. The first thing that you want to do is decode what's important to the funder, right? You want to know what they care about. Why? Because these are the elements of your organization that you want to highlight. These are the things that you want to put to the forefront. You don't want to have the same spiel, the same application, the same copy and paste for everything. You can't. You will not win that way. But you need to treat every funder, every application, every contract as a unique entity that cares about maybe generally the same thing, but slightly different things, right? So you should go in and highlight the key phrases that align with your work, right? So in Bill's case, if they're talking about healing and creativity, well, boom, there you go, right? He has that. For your organization, there might be something else, but you can find this by looking for repeated phrases or repeated values and priorities in the communications, and they're usually very specific about this. They'll say, our values are boom, 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 right? Use that information to really think about how you tailor your message, right? You don't want to change who you are. You want to stay true to heart, but you also want to make sure that your presentation and what your narrative, right, and your story for this grant or whatever it is highlights those things that are the alignment between the two so that the funder sees, oh wow, this person's organization's values are really aligned with ours. This would be such a great investment for us. You want to think about that. You also want to integrate community data. You see how in the slide before, Bill talked about Jamal, right? Which is the made up name of a student, right? But the experience is real. The student's name is fake, but same thing. Jamal had that experience. Why does that matter? Because it's not coming from me, right? It's coming from the people I serve, right? So it's a little less biased, right? There's like, oh wow, like you're saying that you are impacting these students this way, but this is how this student, right, is a testimonial of what he actually went through. And I'm describing that. Sometimes testimonials can come in the form of the people from themselves. So someone can write a quote about your organization and the work that you have done. Sometimes you're describing the work, but either way, it's a unique way to add data without it being clinical and without you saying what you do, right? Now you're describing what happened because of the work you have done, and that's a different story, right? It demonstrates your impact, it demonstrates the community need for your organization, your business, your service, your product, whatever it is. And then the last thing I want to talk about here about listening is a fundable narrative structure, right? I want you to incorporate your organizational strengths, right, with clear language. Um, if there's a word count and it's 5,000 characters, you don't have to use 5,000 characters, right? If it's going to jumble your message, right? It needs to just be clear, concise, and complete. Make it easy for reviewers to find your key points, right? Quickly, you have to think they're going through maybe sometimes hundreds, thousands of applications, right? You don't want to just fill it up just to take space. You want to be able to, actually say what it is. Okay. So I ask you, why now? Why you? Why this? Right? What about your business? What about your idea? What about the thing that you bring to the world that no one else can, right? Why now? Why you? Why this? And that's a question just to ask yourself. But I want you to really answer it. And so we don't have a lot of time left. But I do want to talk about RFPs, right? So RFPs, for people who don't know, this is like a request for proposal. And this is a real one, right? This is what I'm actually applying to. But I wanted to bring it here because I want you to understand like the differences between a grant and an RFP. This is a city, right, looking for a project management team with an educational background to implement youth career pathways. And these can be very tedious. No, not me. Let me not say can be. These are usually 90, 100% very tedious, very long, right? And so you want to be able to quickly determine if this is going to be a good fit for you. So you want to look at the eligibility requirements. You want to make sure I'm eligible and I have the capacity to do this. Because this is not a grant. This is someone paying you to do an amount, to do some work for them for a specified period of time, right? So you want to make sure, do I have the capacity to do this, right? Am I eligible to do it? What is the priority here, right? uh, just briefly scanning this, I see comprehensive program. I see healthcare program, right? I don't have a healthcare background. So guess what? In order for me to be a competitor in this, a true competitor, I would have to partner with someone who does, right? I can't ignore healthcare program. Why? Because this is one of the funders' priorities, right? I can't fake that. I can't AI that. I would have to actually partner with someone who has a background in healthcare, a healthcare program, so that way I could deliver the best service, right? Through my company. You want to look at evaluation criteria and scoring, right? In an RFP, certain things are weighed differently. So it may be the firm's background that's weighed the most that's weighed the heaviest. And then there's other things that maybe it's location, maybe it's years and years of experience, whatever it is, right? They will clearly outline the evaluation criteria and the scoring, right? Um, and then with RFPs, there's usually a lot of required attachments. So there's things that there's budgets to attach. There's letters that you have to get notarized to attach. There's like a whole bunch of, making sure that you don't have like inside connection to someone who was given the RFP that gave it to you. Like there's all these disclaimers that you have to get notarized and that are required as a part of the package. And guess what? If you are missing one of these things. Oh, let me just add this one thing. They also are very specific about the fonts, right? It's Times New Roman 12 point fonts, right? If you don't do that, they don't accept your application, right? You can have a great application, but if it's not in the font they want and the font size, well, they won't accept it, right? So that's the difference between a grant and an RFP. But the thing remains the same, right? You're trying to tell a great story, right? You're making sure you're eligible. You're looking for their priorities, right? And you're making sure the application is complete and you're making sure that you submit it at or before the deadline, right? No, not even a minute after. So quickly, I want to talk a little bit about the different kinds of funding, because there's a lot more than these three, but these are common kinds of funding that you may all come across. And so you're talking about government or public grants, you have private foundations, and you have corporate foundations, right? And one of the things that I have seen in my career that has become so important in grants is relationships. Relationships are probably important, are the highest importance in many arenas, right? But the same way in the grant world, relationships matter. So when you look at government and public grants, right, they're highly structured requirements, just like that RFP I sent you, right? That's probably government money that they are using for that, right? It's extensive. It's extensive documentation. Literally it never ends, right? There's a longer application cycles, and then there's a focus on proven methodologies because they want to know if they hire you or if you take this money, we need to know it works, right? This is a little less personal. We just need to know it works and it works well. Then you have your private foundations. Which are often focused on specific causes. These could be like your family foundations, right? People who have, wealth in the community and they want to give back, right? These are relationship driven. So where relationships become very important, right? Usually, this is just not open for any and everyone. They're relationship driven opportunities, right? And they sometimes require a letter of inquiry at first. Then you have your corporate foundations. Usually with corporate foundations, it's about their business interests, right? Corporations have something called social responsibility, right? And it's their commitment to their organization to be able to do for or invest in somehow. So for them, what they care about is that it's all aligned to their business interest, right? You sometimes will see corporations want their staff to be able to volunteer, right, with different organizations. I work with a client like that. It's a part of their social responsibility, right? There's an emphasis on visibility and impact. That means that, like, you might want to get a press release. You might want to put LinkedIn post up because they care about their community seeing that they are a part and giving back to the community, right? And they're often looking for the return on investment, right? Who are you helping? How are you helping? How many are you helping? What are the demographics of the people you are helping, right? Because they care about LMI, which is low to moderate income. They care about classifications. They care about race or ethnicity. They care about disadvantaged populations or being able to help a specific group, whatever it is. Those are the things that they're looking for. So when you think about your funder and your approach, it should always be tailored to the type of funder you are approaching. The more you understand about your funder or your audience or whoever it is that you are telling your story to, the better story you can tell, which is why I say the best storytellers are great listeners because you have to listen before you talk, right? And the listening part for us comes in the reading, right? What's important? What's a priority? What's eligibility? All those things. Um, but you never want to lose your voice, your authentic voice, right? Here comes that AI again. You never want to lose your authentic voice, and your authentic voice can only come from you, right? You don't want to lose your mission. You don't want to lose your unique story. So, in the next 7 days, okay? And I'm going to talk a little bit about funding because you're probably wanting to know, like, where do I find grants, opportunities, those things like that. So I want you to do a 311, right? Which is I want you to identify 3 potential funders, right, that you align with. They could be a company, a corporation, it doesn't matter, right? And I'll help you in terms of finding something. So for funders, you want to look at your local banks. You want to look at your local community foundations. You want to, if you're a for-profit, right, and you're not eligible for grants, look at your local Apex accelerators, right? Look at the opportunities that are shared in this Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center community. There's a lot of opportunities that come up where people are saying, where you can find funding. I want you to do a little research, right? You could even work with legislators, right, to get a bill passed for money for your organization, which is a whole other topic, right? A different workshop. But, again, that happened with one of my clients that I helped out with, right? They were able to get state of Connecticut money for a cause that they were doing. So there's a lot of ways, right, to do it. But I want you to do some research and I want you to think about 3 different funders, right? Even if it's a company, it could be Nike, it could be Nasdaq. I don't know. It could be Wells Fargo. It could be whatever it is, right? Target, Walmart, whatever, right? It has to connect with you though, right? Think about those things. Think about your top 3 funders. The next thing I want you to do is one specific action that you're going to take in the next 7 days to advance your funding strategy. right? So maybe it's going back to answer the four question I asked you earlier. Maybe it's really taking a deep dive into your organization and saying, I know I have some holes right here. Let me go back and fix it. Right. And then the last thing I want you to do is what's one obstacle you're ready to overcome in your grant writing process? There are resources available. I do have a grant writing toolkit. It's available on my website. If you put code NASDAQ in, you can get it for $3. Um, you can also I also offer one-on-one coaching. You could contact me through my website. And then I'm sure that the community, Michelle and Anna here, like they'll probably do like a post-session survey to see where people are. But I won't lie to you, it's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of commitment. But one thing I can promise you is, and this is an absolute promise, if you do the work, you stay the course, you stay committed, you will win. You will win. And that's it.
Awesome, Tiffany. Thank you so much. That was just like so full of so many golden nuggets of insight and tools and things to avoid. It was just such a great overview. So thank you so much for going through all of that. I think we have time for maybe like one or two questions. So if anyone's in the audience and you have a question for Tiffany, definitely drop it in the chat here. We have a ton of people, both, here and in pre-registration that we're asking like, any, for-profit versus non-profit considerations to think about that you might want to note.
Yeah, absolutely. For nonprofits, you want to make sure that you have audited financials at some point. Maybe not in the beginning, but it's going to become important at some point because nonprofits obviously have certain tax regulations that for-profits are not, and that becomes sometimes that will separate you from or stop you from getting bigger money, right? The more money you want, the more they're going to say, have you had audited financials, right? You may be able to get 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, but once you start going into the 150,000, 200, half a million, they want to see that there is someone who's a third party CPA professional saying that you are using your money wisely. There's no red flags. You can be trusted. You are credible, right? So that's one of the main things I would say for a nonprofit. For a for-profit, what I would say in terms of grants, yes, the grant seems is a little bit less lucrative for you, for sure, but there are grants out there, right? And you could always turn a opportunity into a service or a product, right? I have done that a lot in the past where I've seen, people put out grants for profits. Maybe I didn't win it, right? I'm actually waiting for one now for my own business, right? And I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm thinking to myself, if I don't get this grant, how do I turn this into a service for this company because I know it's needed, right? And sometimes for profits, um it might be even better for you, right? To actually, because the thing about grants is they come with compliance, right? You can't just get it and then spend it how you like. You have to get it and spend it how you said. And then you have to prove that you spent it as you said you would,
Yeah.
right? So there is work after that. But what I will say is for profits, look at Apex accelerators. They help you in that space. Not grants wise, but contract wise. And then there's also like the Alice, the Skip, like those organizations, but they're a little less in person. They're a little bit more competitive, right? Because there's so many people applying. For profits, if it's your first time, I would say stick to your local, right? Because your local is going to care about your work the most, right? And you could also invite that person for coffee and say, hey, I just want to talk to you about my program, right? And build those relationships and sort of invite them to programs you do and things like that to get them to see who you are.
Yeah, really wonderful. Thank you. So much to consider there, but great for kind of both sides to think about. Um, Another common question or common theme I'm seeing, I know there's like a lot of, either industry wise or just like, global wise, a lot of uncertainties. Some folks have experienced setbacks or maybe like just like lack of momentum in certain moments. And so, you know, any advice, on just kind of like framing those moments for this purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I know. that was a topic at a conference I went to was like education, right? We think about like government and like how certain things are shifting. What I will say about that is that there is still money out there. I think it all comes down again to what we talk about today. It's how you frame it. It's the story. It's the story. The mission and your vision it never changes. It's the story and the way you say it and the way you communicate and the way you message that speaks to who you are talking to, right? So when I say the listening part, that also talks about like knowing what's happening in the world, right? It's important to know what's going on. It's important to know like certain phrases like disconnected youth and different things that foundations are talking about because they want to invest in that people, everything is workforce now, right? I'm pretty sure across the country, everything is workforce development, career pathways, these, right? You have to say it, right? Say it. You have to say
Mhm.
it. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, awesome. Wonderful. Well, Tiffany, this has been so amazing. If you had just one key takeaway or piece of wisdom that you wanted to leave with everyone here today, what would that be?
Do it. You have to believe you will win. I'm telling you, the win starts with your mind. Like, and I'm talking about in life. I'm talking about far beyond grants. Like, you have to believe that you can win. And literally, it sounds so cliche sometimes, but it's the truth. Like, once you really begin to believe that you can do it, not only you can, but it's valuable, it's needed, it's necessary, it connects differently. And I will say that is the thing. If I could leave you with is do not walk away from this session today not believing that what you have to offer is not important. You have to believe it is because it is. I don't even have to know, but I know it is. That's what I do know.
Amazing. Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us today for setting such an amazing overview and just sharing all of your experience and insight with everyone here today. And on behalf of the Nasdaq Center, we are just so thankful for you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. If anybody wants to connect, I see a couple LinkedIn things. Please don't hesitate. Don't hesitate to email me or, connect. I want to help.
Yes, and we'll put those links in the chat and share them after the event as well. So definitely make sure to check for those links. And to our audience, we'd love for you to join us for upcoming webinars, which you can also view using those links that are going to be in the chat. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.